Welcome to the Retail Tech Podcast, where we talk about the full spectrum of technologies and implementation used in omnichannel and online retail. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at retailtechpodcast.com, and we always look forward to your feedback. I'm speaking with Kelly Goetsch, the Chief Product Officer at commercetools, going over what we saw at the NRF 17, the retail's big show in New York last week. Hi, Kelly. How are you doing?
Hi, Darius. Doing well. How are you?
Well, I saw you had a really good overview on LinkedIn, and I wanted to see if we can just spend a few minutes and go over the different points that you brought up.
In general, it's more of a technology conference than ever, but what I find remarkable is that retailers are still not using technology to its fullest. We've talked about omnichannel now for 10 plus years. But if you look at it, the majority of retailers are not yet actually doing it. And it's only a handful at the very top. It's the Walmarts and the Targets and the Best Buys of the world that are talking about it in a meaningful way. But as an end consumer, if you walk into a retail store, it's still an experience very much out of the 1980s. And it's quite frustrating. So it was a bit interesting to see that, that people are saying the right things, but they're not actually doing the right things yet.
So the top 10 or whatever the number is, how far along do you think they are on their journey of becoming a true omni-channel?
I think they're just getting started. I do. If you go into the top 25 retailers in the US, I'll give you an example. If I add something to my shopping cart, on their .com, and I walk into a store and I present my credit card and I purchase that item in the store, I would bet that all 25 of the 25 that you sample would still have that as that product in your digital shopping cart, even though you've bought it in the physical world. There's no reconciliation from point of sale purchases to the web because they're still treated as two separate channels. And the vast majority of retailers, they have two separate organizations. They have the physical retail organization and they have the .coms. And until those groups are merged and brought under the same umbrella, you're still going to have that split experience. So I would say of the top 25 even, I would say that none are doing what I would consider true omnichannel from a customer standpoint.
Okay, so in order for that to actually happen, in this case, the data would basically have to be, would it have to be in the same database, or how would it actually work on the back end for that to happen, what you just mentioned?
Yeah, in the back end, you need single systems of record for all data. And what that means is you need to have one database, for example, that just houses inventory, right? And there's one database, one team that works on inventory, and there's one API exposed. And the retail stores and the .com should pull all of their inventory information from that one system. Same for promotions, same for pricing, same for products, same for ratings and reviews. Right?
Okay.
Everything should pull from these individual systems of record. Now, in the back end, it doesn't have to be one big database, but each of those points of data requires its own system of record. Okay. Whether or not that's merged into one or not.
Okay, so basically, the store, the mobile, the iOS app, the website, they should all be really just clients to that one API.
Right. Everything has to pull from that.
Right.
And if you look at physical retail stores and what we saw at NRF, the point of sale systems are all running 80s era software. I mean, all of them. It's ridiculous.
Right.
And, when you're running 30-plus-year-old batch-based software, you might have a shiny screen on top of it. But behind the scenes, it's still everything is offline. You're doing reconciliations at the end of the day. It's not real time. And it's run and operated by a completely different group within most retailers. So as long as you have that split, you're going to have that. Instead, the point of sale should be a very thin client. It should be a thin, basically a veneer over the top of those APIs. and there should be one centralized group. It shouldn't be called out as e-commerce. It should just be, the technology for the retailer, and that one group should be producing these APIs. And then there should be these individually. There should be these client-specific UIs that consume the APIs behind the scenes.
Okay, right. All right. So yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, everybody, I think, all the major players, at least the major players, vendors, I think they all say, and they probably can expose some form of an API to their system these days, right?
To some degree.
To some degree, it's not all. It's even when you say API, it's not a fully encompassing and the same thing for everybody.
Right. What they've done is these large vendors, and there are a handful of them out there. It's IBM, Oracle, Kibo, Aptos, Infor, and there are a handful of these other ones. They've gone out and they've acquired point solutions for each layer of the stack. Right, so they have one application for supply chain management. They have one for commerce. They have one for promotions. Right, they've been acquiring these point players that each do that one thing really well. And the problem with that is it's not vertically integrated. Right, they're all separate acquisitions. They're owned and run separately. They're marketed as part of one portfolio, but they're still not one product. And as long as you have that split, and the fact that a lot of that technology is old, a lot of that's from the 90s, a lot of it's from the 80s, that's old technology. And you can only modernize that so much by throwing an API on top of that. Instead, what you need to do is start by modeling the APIs and then have the implementations that map back to that. And I'll give you an example of an industry that's done this. Public infrastructure as a service. If you look at Google Cloud, if you look at Azure, if you look at AWS, all of them started out with really nice APIs, and in-house they assembled development teams and they built organically their entire infrastructure as a service and supporting stacks. It's very rare that they've gone out and done acquisitions. And I think retailers need to take the same approach, which is to say, we're going to build a lot of this. We'll look and augment where it makes sense. But we're going to take this in-house and we're going to be the general contractor for this project.
Okay. So, of course, not all of the retailers can do that. And I don't think there are enough resources out there if every retailer wanted to really to put their own team together, right? There's not enough people to do that. So
there aren't, but I would expect a software vendor to go out and build that stack from scratch.
Right. So that's the job of the software vendors then, to actually help with that. Right.
Right. And we at commercetools, and that's, of course, where I work, we've done that for the commerce piece. But I would expect somebody else to do that for the entire stack. But I just haven't seen it. All of these vendors have the same collection of software, same vintage. Right? As each one of those layers of the retail software stack got hot, they all got bought at about the same time. So it's a big hodgepodge of technology.
Right.
And I would expect somebody to go make an Amazon or an Azure style investment in the software space and go build or acquire a modern stack and bring something very cohesive end to end to market.
Right. Okay. So again, when you look at the marketing materials from some of the platforms, that's what they say they've done, but you have to be able to really dig in to understand to what level that's actually been complete. So, all right. So talking about some of the other points, you mentioned you saw this thing about the CPG selling directly to consumer. So the direct to consumer model is actually getting more and more traction, right?
Right. There were a bunch of representatives there. I saw badges all over the place from CPGs. And they're actually building separate e-commerce groups. And they're doing that for two reasons. The first reason is they can support their retailers. I met with somebody from a large soda company in the US, global actually, and he was saying that they can predict the demand of their product at any given 7-Eleven convenience store better than 7-Eleven can. Because they're able to aggregate that data, and they have very complicated analytics that they run. And anyway, they can figure that out better. So if they have the right products in the retail stores, they can drive more sales for the retailer, and they can drive more sales for them as well. The other model, which I also have been hearing about, is cutting out the middlemen directly. And Unilever bought Dollar Shave Club in July for $1 billion. And that's an example of CPG thinking they can go out and retail better to their customers than the retailers can. And, honestly, I'll bet they can. In many cases, they probably can. And technology today allows retailers to be cut out, right? They don't have the value they provided is being less and less. If you can just pay a few dollars a month and get something delivered to your house through the mail and e-commerce, it probably makes more sense to do that in many cases.
They
So
can,
we're seeing,
yeah, I agree. They can do it online, but they can't do it on a local level. They can't have their own stores, right?
right? No, I'm not seeing them build stores, and I'm not hearing that either. It's more e-commerce, right? As
Right.
physical goods, and we've seen this for a while now with hard goods. But we're seeing a lot of grocery migrate online as well. And in Europe, for example, I think market penetration in the UK is like 60% for online grocery. Right? So 60% of groceries are bought online. And in the rest of Europe, we're seeing that as well. We're seeing grocery stores start selling online. And it's a lot more convenient for everyone. So we see grocery stores with local fulfillment, local delivery. We're also seeing these things like Dollar Shave Club, for example, where they're just little point products. A lot of times it's cosmetics of some sort. It's pressing those dash buttons and you get some laundry detergent delivered to your house. You can do traditional commerce as well and save a trip to the drugstore or to the grocery store, and you don't have to buy the CPG goods through the retail outlets.
Right. Yeah. So, I say that they can't do it locally. As you mentioned, not all of it even needs to be local. A lot of it can be done just online and get it delivered. So, depending on the product, um, that mixture of what part of it can you actually handle directly with the customer and what part of it do you actually need to work with a third party retailer is the difference, So
Right.
let's say if you take it even further than that, let's say somebody that's growing lettuce, would they be able to in the future set up their own commerce platform and sell lettuce directly to customers without, and then there would be like an warehouse, or not a warehouse, like a marketplace where you go to buy groceries online directly from the grower. That would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the end state. I do. It
Okay.
makes a lot of sense. And if you think about it, retailers used to provide a handful of services, and those services are not as important anymore. So one was a quality check, right? If you went into a reputable grocery store, you know that the products aren't going to kill you, right? That they're
Right.
safe.
Right.
But online, at least, you can get reviews from thousands of people, which is really nice. It's really convenient. So that's one thing retailers are kind of getting squeezed out. The next is just physical local fulfillment of the goods. Right? The retailer would take orders of goods from wholesalers, and it would sell those goods locally. But now with e-commerce and everything being shipped through postal carriers, you don't have to have that anymore. Another one is payment. The retailers you could put everything in a shopping cart and you could pay for it all with one transaction.
Right.
And if you have these marketplaces now, you can replicate that same thing. So, the reasons for going to a physical store are eroding as technology and logistics evolve. So I think long term, you're right. I think that's kind of how the market would end up looking.
That would be interesting because I definitely, so that from a consumer point of view, it actually does something that I've been thinking about is that, how do I know how this lettuce was actually grown? Where is the location? If you get really start to get health conscious and you want to have the information so you can make the best decision for yourself is would you buy a lettuce that was grown in a field which is right next to the Freeway 405? Or would you get one which is 50 miles from it? I
Right.
mean, I don't want to sound like a health nut, but maybe I am.
No,
It
that's
matters
fair.
for me. Yeah.
Well, and that's what the internet does overall is it broadens the marketplace. So rather than going to your grocery store and seeing two varieties of lettuce, you now potentially have thousands. And as the transparency improves in the supply chain, you can actually see how the goods made it. So you can see where they were grown.
Right.
Some emerging technologies like blockchain allow you to do that. So it's hugely transformative. But again, going back to your original question, where are retailers today? They're just getting started right now.
Right.
It's early.
So it seems to me that you mentioned the top, let's say top tier 25, whatever the number is. I think probably if you look at the bottom, they're probably the most innovative right now. They're the ones that if you have a really small company that's just getting started, it's a lot easier for them to be fully omnichannel, right? They just go on one of these hosted, platforms, Shopify, and there's other ones, and they immediately get access to a single database, source of record, and their different devices the customers are shopping on are all communicating with that. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. That's at the very low end of the market. But yeah, if you're a retailer of substantial size,
Right.
you can go build or buy a reasonable stack that's cloud-based, that's cloud native in architecture that conforms to all of today's architecture principles. You wouldn't go out and buy a 1980s era batch-based
Right.
point of sale system anymore. So yeah, and newer retailers certainly do have that advantage. And that's why you see retailers like Amazon, for example, getting into the physical retail game because they can go in with these brand new modern technology stacks. They don't have that legacy to deal with. So it's going to be a very quickly changing market here in the next 10 years.
It will. And that 10 years is going to come faster than we expected. So so the next item that point that you made was also very interesting for me. The concept of, again, digital transformation in the organizational level of the companies, the retailers, and how the roles are actually changing. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, digital used to be this thing off to the side that retailers would have. So they would have a chief digital officer, for example, or they would have a VP of e-commerce because it was new, different, right? We don't quite know what to do with this, so we're going to dump it into a separate group. But there's this famous law called Conway's Law, which states that the software mirrors the organization structure that produced it. So if you have a VP of e-commerce, he or she is going to go out and build or buy a commerce platform that just does digital commerce. The head of retail point of sale is going to go out and buy, you can't really build, but they're going to go out and buy a point of sale system, right? And what you end up with is these siloed software applications, and there's no real integration between any of them. Right? They only do so for things like buy online, pick up in store, for example, which is a kind of a lighter integration. But until those organization structures are collapsed, you're still going to have that separation of experience. And that's more of an organizational problem than it is a technical problem.
Okay, so we're seeing the major retailers actually making changes in the actual roles and responsibilities of their executives. Like what you mentioned, Walmart. They promoted their CTO of Walmart.com to be the CTO of retail operations. So now the person that was only responsible for the online channel is responsible for the entire retail supply chain, correct?
Correct. And that's what we're starting to see is these the CDOs of the world are being collapsed into the normal business. Target's case was specific. He was just let go. But what we see is those functions, the chief digital officer, that's basically now the same as the chief operating officer or the chief marketing officer. Right? They're the same roles. It shouldn't be off to the side as separate. It should just be the business.
Right. So my question is, I mean, just even going from even on the technical level, going from handling the .com part to the entire omni-channel supply chain, it's not the same skill set and the same experience. You need to know a lot more than just the online world. And how many people can actually do that? That's
Yeah.
it. I'm thinking like in real life now. The gentleman or lady has started their work. It's not impossible, but it's a different set of skills, I think, also, or
Right.
experience, knowledge.
Well, remember, it's not necessarily the supply chain. It's more of getting the right products to the right place at the right time. All right, and making them discounted or using marketing to make them appealing enough for a consumer to purchase. And whether you're in a physical store or in a digital channel of some sort, those skills are still largely the same. And what those folks should be doing, right? These people who are in charge of both physical and virtual, they should be they should be engaging in creating individually consumable APIs. Right? In our world, that's a microservice, but that's a topic for another podcast. But what you would do is you define one API for promotions, and any channel that wants to consume promotional data can consume promotions from that API. And what it does is it reduces the technical competency required for these teams in each group. So now the point of sale team isn't managing an entire technology stack and doing integrations everywhere. That team that manages the point of sale is building a thin JavaScript or HTML-based client that interfaces with this well-defined set of APIs. And that's a very different skill set. Just in general, though, there were actually some pretty interesting sessions about the tech skill gap, because a lot of retailers are in, quite frankly, they're in pretty boring places out there in the country and in the world. They tend to be in the cold Midwest. And the Silicon Valley engineers who are required for this digital transformation just don't want to join big, slow retailers who tend not to pay very much money. So that was an issue. But I think retailers have to do this to remain competitive.
Right. Yeah, I think it's definitely, I mean, just even if you look at it from the role of a COO or the CMO, being responsible for the VP or the e-commerce operation, it's going to be interesting. That's like one of my questions is that how does it actually work in the details? Like even if you look at just like traffic, measuring traffic, when you do it online, you have different set of vendors, providers, principals. When you do it in the store, it's different. You have to know all of these, or at least have a way of knowing all of these different things, and being able to bring it together. So if so, here's a question: if you were thinking about the role of the person that's going to be responsible for the technology, what is the most critical technical skill that would help them in that role? Is it integration? Is it understanding, for example, big data? Is it marketing? Is it the actual commerce platform?
I might be biased, but I really think microservices, because if you implement microservices properly, and again, it's hard to do, but it's possible. If you implement microservices properly, then there really is no integration work to speak of. Integration is required when you have all of these different systems, when you have a point of sale system, a commerce system, when you have a separate promotion coupon system, right? When you have all of these separate systems, then you have to integrate them really, really well. If you have microservices and do it that way from the start, there is no integration work required because there's only one system of record for each bit of data.
Definitely.
So it's a fundamental shift in doing things. I think big data is obviously very important in being able to analyze that, but that assumes that you have an omni-channel retail operation up and running. And I think with microservices, and by the way, this is what Amazon's doing. It's what Target's doing. They're completely reorienting around microservices. It's what Walgreens are doing. A lot of the big flagship U.S. retailers are already adopting this orientation. Macy's, Home Depot, Lowe's, right? It's a who's who of retailers are moving in this direction. So I think if you master that, I think you're in good shape as a retailer.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a point for the recruiters, the executive recruiters.
But let me go back to something you mentioned a minute ago that I think was important. You said, how do you track visitors in stores? And this, again, I think is more of an organizational problem. So traditionally, there's a physical retail store team, and they have a couple people whose job it is to track visitors. Right? And there's a tech stack that's used in each store to manage that. And then there's a reporting dashboard and everything else. And then separately in the e-commerce organization, there's another small team that also analyzes this data, but they do it online. And it's impossible at most retailers to correlate virtual sales and virtual traffic with real foot traffic in stores. And if you organize this in microservices principles, where you have a single team that is responsible for tracking visitors across the entire company, then you build competency. And what that allows you to do then is to start tracking, like, all right, well, if we have one store in this city and the local newspaper published an article with a link to it, and all of a sudden we see a bunch of virtual traffic and then we see foot traffic, then we can do cause and effect. And today, if they're in separate organizations, they're separate technology teams, they're separate dashboards, they're separate everything. There's no way whatsoever of correlating that data. And that's an example of what retailers will have to start doing if they're going to succeed.
Same as vendors, right? They need to basically bring all of this together and offer one package to retailers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, cool. So let's go down the list here and see what else we've got. The closing the physical/digital gap. This is, I think, basically along the lines of what we've been talking about, right? And you referred to the POS systems already and the Conway's law. So I think we already covered that, right? Is there anything left from that point?
No, I just want to reiterate how abysmal the state of retail is in the U.S. from an in-store standpoint. They're old systems. The experience is very fragmented. If I walk into a store and I spend $10,000 a year with a retailer, and I have a $1,000 item in my shopping cart, the store associates have no idea who I am, and I, as a consumer, am in no way compelled to identify myself to them. It's just crazy if you think about it. And today's digital natives don't want that fragmented experience. They want to load up a handful of products in their shopping cart on their mobile phone. They want to walk into a physical store. They want to be able to enter in their name or their email or their Facebook handle And then they want to tell a store associate, hey, I have these 5 goods in my cart. I want to try them on. And then they want to complete that purchase through their mobile device. And there's just so much that physical retailers today just don't do. Right? It's all based around this 80s era. I'm going to whip out my credit card or my charge card back then, right? And I'm going to pay for the goods, and the retailers have no idea who you are.
Right.
And it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's even more important in the fact that, like, today I just saw an article, a study that came out that says the millennial generation is even shopping more in retail stores than all the other, like the baby boomers or even the Generation Z. So this is the generation that's going to have the biggest probably purchasing power for at least the next decade, right?
Right.
And they are still going to the retail stores. And if you don't, capture the data and communicate with them, properly, you're leaving money on the table.
Right. But what's interesting, though, is those shoppers are going to stores, but they're being influenced by digital channels prior to the sale.
Exactly.
So
yes.
Deloitte just came out with a study, and they said that 60% of all retail store purchases are influenced by a digital channel. And the fact that you can have, and again, you talk about the atrocious state of retail today in some aspects. I would say at least 2/3 of the top 25 retailers in the U.S. have separate in-store promotional systems versus online. So you can't take an online discount and apply it to a physical store and vice versa. Right? They're completely separate systems. And that just upsets customers, including myself, to no end.
Right. Yeah. So what about this part about the merger of content and commerce? What did you see on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at retail, if you take kind of a reductive view of it, it's basically just trying to sell commoditized goods online or anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't add any value to the experience, then you're competing on pennies, right? It's who has the lowest price.
Right.
You're basically, in the Amazon marketplace, right? That's the style of seller you have, right? Where it's, I'm 3 cents lower, so therefore I get all of the purchases, right? And that's not very effective, right? The margins on that aren't very good, and you're not adding any value to the customer. Instead, what a lot of customers require, and where you can add value as a brand, specifically more brands, is creating compelling content, right? And I have this image on my LinkedIn post, which I think is kind of interesting. This was at the Adobe booth, and there's a physical TV screen in the store, and it says, click here, right? It's a touch screen. It says shop date night looks. So you can flick through different looks for a date night. And then once you select the look that you would like, you can be directed in the store to purchase that physical look.
Right.
And that's an example of where, you're not just pawing through clothes to try to find an outfit, right? These are professionally built date night looks, right? Top to bottom. And you can purchase the entire thing in that physical store. And that's an example of content that, binds a consumer to the brand, builds loyalty, and it gets them to purchase things they otherwise wouldn't purchase. Because if it's a complete look, they're going to buy the whole thing.
Right. So I think that's another thing that, I guess I want to clarify is that going to the store also has a different meaning, right? Just like you said, than what it used to be before. A consumer that used to go to store before, they was just dependent on the information that was in the store, or whatever they saw in the newspaper. Now, when somebody goes to the store, they're fully connected. They can get any information they want on your store or your individual products that you're selling. Right. And that's where I think the difference is also going to be more apparent, is how integrated the systems are. So,
right, but not even integrated, because integration assumes that there are multiple back-end systems, what I'm advocating
Okay,
for.
so correction accepted. Yes.
It's an integrated experience, but behind the
Experience.
scenes,
Yes,
there's single systems of record for each little bit of data.
I agree. Yes. So the integrated experience or the seamless experience, how that the experience, not the actual integration points. And I think we both kind of like talk about this because we have lived through the quote unquote integration. I guess what do you call it? The decades of integration, the back end integration. So for us, the word integration means something very specific. So
Yes,
yeah,
that's exactly it.
right. So what about this? So you mentioned as far as like a modern vertical retail stack. What would that look like? What is a modern vertical retail stack, in your opinion? Of full retail, not just online.
Um, I think it would actually be pretty similar to what Amazon has built. So 10 years ago, Jeff Bezos sent a famous memo to the entire company and said, I want you to organize around the concept of APIs. And today, Amazon has thousands of small granular APIs. They tend not to be duplicated, right? So there's only one API for one business function. And it becomes really easy for them to build different experiences. If they're doing a physical store concept, they can now plug these point of sale systems into these APIs, right? If they're building a new Apple Watch app, they can consume all of this functionality as APIs. And that orientation is great. When you go to the product detail page of an Amazon.com website, behind the scenes, you hit 136 different microservices or APIs, depending on how you look at it. And that's very beneficial because those 136 different microservice teams can all be publishing updates to their services at the exact same time concurrently. So I think Amazon has really done a great job, and they are actually taking this out to physical stores. So they actually are doing it in a real way across both physical and virtual.
Okay, and then if you take that to the next level and you apply it to the microservices architecture and the organizational level, I think Amazon has also really moved in that level in that format on the organizational level as well, not just technology, right?
Right, exactly. Target's also done this in a very big way. Their CIO had a big keynote about their digital transformation and their orientation around APIs. So that's important. Like they're doing it too. Best Buy famously has done that. And if you go to developer.bestbuy.com, they have a huge developer portal to get people to start using their APIs. Lowe's and Home Depot have famously done this, and they've published some really interesting case studies, both organization and technology. So, we're seeing this start to happen. But again, it's hard to go into an established retailer and basically blow it up and say,
Right.
We're going to do a complete reorganization. It's also hard because retailers are big organizations. They might be 200,000-300,000 people. And in every other job function, people are organized by what they do, right? So there's a team of 20 people who are cost accountants, right? There's a team of 10 who are staff lawyers, right? They're organized around job function. And that's how IT is defined today, right? There's a pool of 500 developers, there's 100 DBAs, there's 100 ops people, right? People are organized around what they do.
Right.
So to go in there and tell a VP of infrastructure, hey, we're going to completely change your job, and the 200 people you manage are going to go work somewhere else, it isn't very easy for a CIO to do that. Now, I think it's better because you adopt a more product-focused orientation, right? But it's hard to do that. It's mechanically, it's very hard to do that.
Right. Yep. Definitely easier said than done.
Yeah.
So, but it has to be done in some form of shape. So, I guess my next thought is that you working with commercetools, you're pretty much in the center of this conversion to the new retail stack. And what did you see from talking to the different retailers at NRF? are most of them appreciative and understand this needs to be done, or are people still like not even accepting it?
Yeah, I'd say 3/4 of the folks we talked to understood the need to do this. Um, and I'd say about 1/4 of the people we talked to were actually doing it in some way.
They've started.
They've actually started doing it. And again, these are multi-year journeys, but you've got to start somewhere, I guess.
Right, right. Okay, cool. Well, I think that's basically where the growth, the future of the retail tech industry is going to be, and all
Yeah,
the different
couldn't agree
services
more.
and vendors and products that are going to be around that concept.
Yeah, it's all going to be cloud-based. It's going to be have an API orientation. Microservices is now just seen as the way you architect applications. It's really interesting. I read a book on cloud native, and it didn't even call out microservices as being something you do. It's just assumed as part of that style of architecture. Right? It's just how you build software today. So as we see a new generation of retail software, as we see CIOs with this digital transformation mandate, as we see e-commerce fold into the normal business, which kind of helps with the Conway's Law thing, right? As we see all of these changes. And I think the big stick is Amazon. I mean, Amazon wasn't even present at the conference. But if you look at their market cap, Amazon alone's market cap is worth more than Walmart, Target, Kohl's, Best Buy, Macy's, Nordstrom, JCPenney, Sears. It's worth more than all of those combined. So as Amazon gets bigger, these retailers are going to be struggling for their existence. So they're going to have to make these changes. And those are the style of changes you have to make to compete with Amazon.
Right. Well, yeah, Amazon wasn't there, but it was basically on everybody's mind, I think.
Talking about the elephant in the room, right?
Right. Another thing that I saw that I was actually impressed to see was I saw a booth from Google at the conference, and I was happy to see that. So I think that's definitely another, they really add a different perspective and an important one to what retailers need to be doing in their tech stack. So,
yeah, great.
So that was good to see. And I didn't see much on delivery. Did you see anything on delivery? Drones, delivery, ship,
No, not. I think that's more of a supply chain thing. But yeah, you would have expected to see something. I just didn't see anything.
Whereas like CES was like consumed by drones and, I mean, it was a major play over there. So
yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, you would expect to see something, but again, yeah, I just didn't see anything there.
But overall, I thought it was a great show. I think I was really impressed by the number of retailers that I saw there. So that's a really good sign, and I was happy to see that. In a lot of conferences you go that there's more vendors than actual customers, but I didn't feel that this is the same way I felt about Shop Talk last year as well. So I think the retailers, the fact that they're going to these conferences is a really positive sign.
Well, and NRF actually goes out of their way to make them feel special. They have retailer-only networking events, retailer-only everything. It was really the vendors, and I really felt it this year, but, we kind of were treated like second-class citizens there, which is fine. It's a retail conference. I mean, I get it. But, it was, if you go to the tech conferences, the SaaS vendors like us are taken care of very nicely. But, you go to the retail conferences and they don't care about it.
Well, which is what NRF is really good at, is it's really helping the retailers. So I'm sure it wasn't intent to make you guys feel like that, but the focus, the change of focus, the difference is obvious between the two. So, all right, well, thank you so much, Kelly. Great talking to you, and best of luck with your new role at Commercetools.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Look forward to doing another one of these with you sometime.
Definitely. Take care.